Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for selecting this show because there are so many podcasts out there that you can choose from, but we designed this show to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and every single week I have the honor to be here with Craig Brown, my co-host. Now, Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, here we are again.
Hey, you found me on the road, Thom. It's good to be out and about a bit, and that means I'm vaccinated, which everybody knows probably by now. And I'm saying this because if you're not vaccinated, please get vaccinated. That way you can get out on the road and you can see other people. It'd be really cool. So looking forward to today.
Everybody is listening to this audio, but I can see Craig because we're recording on Zoom, and he is actually sitting in his motorhome. When he first logged on, I'm like, where are you, Craig? But he's in his motorhome because he and his wife are off visiting relatives for the first time in over a year and a half. So that's got to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so it feels good, and I hope the same for everybody else, that you can, if you haven't gotten out already, you can get out soon and see your loved ones.
Well, Craig, I hope you're ready for a good show, because every week you and we try so hard to bring interesting interviews and other ideas to help all of the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today is no different. Today, we are joined by Chris Cox. And Chris is the Director of Technology Services at Piola Digital. Now, what he does, he leads nearshore software application development for growth-oriented technology companies. And when we say nearshore, that's a little different than offshore because they typically work with companies that are in the Western Hemisphere. And I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more about that. Hey, Chris, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to jam with you guys here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So Chris, tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you get started and what led you to Piola Digital?
So I probably have the most unorthodox background in technology you guys will ever hear of. I fell into technology by chance. I'm actually a Spanish major turned product geek. All throughout high school, I studied Spanish in the university as well. Actually did the last 2 years of my undergrad through Arizona State University's online program. So that allowed me to live wherever I wanted to. And being a Spanish major, my next logical step was to go live abroad. So I ended up living 6 years in Argentina. After my first 2 years, that was time for graduation. So I flew home and I said, all right, I will fly back to Argentina. If I can't find a job within 6 months, I'll come home, call it quits. So I went back after graduation. I had a job offer from a very small web development company. The main requirements for the job must be a native speaker of English because our clients were based in the States. And 2, must know how to use WordPress. And at the time, I had this very makeshift travel blog going on that I was editing in WordPress. So that's how I got my foot in the door in the technology world. And then when I got in, thankfully, I thought it was incredible. I was blown away. So I just kind of, dove head in. And I've had the opportunity to work with and learn from some really awesome, really talented people, from developers to product managers to, scrum masters, whatever you can think of. I've been exposed to, and I've been, so grateful for this career and the opportunities that I've had, just, I guess, by pure luck.
So good for you, Chris. So how did you get to your current position?
So where I'm at right now is after I kind of found my footing in technology, I was working at more and more, I guess, established firms. But I wanted to do something, I guess, for myself, and also what I like about my experience in Latin America is I try and pay it back to that region of the world, because if it wasn't for some folks that may have taken a chance on me when I was probably not the best candidate on paper, I probably wouldn't have learned a lot of the stuff that I learned early on. And in addition to that, Latin American talent has a difficult time sometimes reaching the States. Like if you're not a huge management consulting firm that has the resources to go and install that infrastructure down there and really provide the opportunity for folks to work on US-based or North America or Europe-based projects, it's really difficult for some of those really talented folks to show off some of their talents here. So that's one of the reasons why, I try and do what I do. Okay,
well, cool. So nearshore, you were teaching me before the broadcast here. It's the same time zone. So for those of us on the show today who have dealt with the other side of the globe in the northern hemisphere, it's really frustrating. It's frustrating to both groups of people to be 12 hours apart or 8 hours apart. It's hard enough working with Europe. I'm in the U.S., right? It's hard enough to work with Europe just given the 6 or 5 hour difference. So, So part of what you meant by nearshore is same time zone, even though it's just as far away, right? It's in the southern hemisphere, so the seasons are opposite each other, but at least working together, it's the same workday basically. We had people in Brazil that I worked with, and I think they were an hour ahead of us, but it was easy to deal with, right? So we picked up on you about agile practices, and we've had a couple guests that talk about agile, and agile didn't come from the mechanical engineering world. It kind of came from the software world, and I was curious, how did you discover it and learn more about it? Did you have a mentor, or is it something you have picked up through reading? I'm just trying to help the audience. How do they know more about agile? And a lot of the experiences are different. It's not necessarily learning from a textbook.
Yeah, so I've had a bit of a mix of in my experience, which I still today think my experience is kind of backwards, just because of how I got into technology.
It's only backwards, my friend, because there's so many people out there to say you got to do it this way. When you find out what it really is like, you're doing fine.
Yeah. That's
so it's
fair.
Not backwards, it's just different, okay?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point. I had some really awesome folks early on in my career when I was just getting out of college who kind of, showed me the ropes. And I ended up learning a lot of things, not by their, I guess, formal vocabulary name, but just kind of hands-on and just being in the, for example, like Scrum ceremonies or product increment, program increment, planning and those types of things. Just kind of having that exposure early on gave me an idea of what the software development world was like. And then later on, I started to take some courses. I like to think that having a nice mix between the classroom and real life is a really good one. So I actually started taking some of these courses later on in my career, just to kind of get some of the formal, the academic side of it. Definitely.
The way we all learn, a lot of cultures, not so much where we came from, but other places in the world, regardless of your profession, you would go through an intern program, right? A mentorship program. And I think of tradesmen in Central Europe, in particular, the tool and die folks. You worked as an apprentice to a tool and die maker for 20 plus years before you were a skilled tool and die person yourself, right? So we need that. I went to college at a program that required cooperative education. You had to go work 6 months and then you went to class 6 months, and that was a requirement of the program. It wasn't optional. You didn't get a degree from that school if you didn't go through that. So I couldn't agree with you more that practical side really helps put it in context. So, okay. So you became an agile guy. Do processes, and I'm thinking about business processes, so the way you make a decision, does agile work with that, or do they coexist and complement each other, or do they conflict? And I'm just curious, in your experience, what you've seen. Do you have to throw out business processes when you do agile?
So I think it's the agile project or process is, to me, and someone else might have another opinion, and I'm totally open to that. I'm still learning every day, but to me, the agile process lives within the actual product development. So when there are business decisions that are to be made, Based on my experience, I kind of feel like that lives outside of that world. And a lot of times, some of the upper leadership is going to make business decisions based on, what they're seeing in the market or metrics, things that might not necessarily impact the way we actually deliver the product from a technical standpoint. So yeah, I do think they can coexist because the business might say we need to deliver this set of features based on, this metric or that we're seeing in the market. And then that's where they would engage the technology side of the house, get involved with the folks whose job it is to kind of document the requirements and then figure out how do we socialize that with the technical team.
So software tends to be a labor intensive, and that tends to be the constraint. And when you're manufacturing something like a car, the constraint could be the amount of money you need to update a factory. And so sometimes business decisions and the processes are all about where you go get the money and how do you invest it into a plant. In software, I think it's a little simpler. It is human intensive, and your constraint ends up being humans not finding money for upgrading a factory. And I've seen these business processes with Agile get really confused because the business, if you're borrowing a lot of money, right, tens of millions of dollars, you're not going to keep changing every week when when you come through your next cycle. And so it's really tough to figure out, okay, when do I have to lock down this business decision based on investment versus when do I allow the next Scrum cycle to occur? The really good software guys are figuring out how to meld the two. And so you're right, they have to coexist. And it's interesting to see that happen. It's not straightforward as people might imagine.
Yeah. Not at all.
So from your vantage point, what are the 3 best benefits for Agile practices? They started way back when because everybody said we had requirements, but the truth of the matter is people didn't have requirements because customers weren't clear what they wanted, right? So how do you teach us what are the benefits of Agile practices?
I think one of the main benefits has to do with exactly what you just said. Like sometimes the customer is not 100% clear on what they want or need, and the main value behind Agile development is that you get the chance to put something out there that works. Even if that's at a very bare level, and you iterate from there based on the feedback that you get from the end users. And the only way the only way you can learn from that is you put it out there. It works, right? And okay, we hate this, and this, so change it.
You use 2 words that were really important, right? Need and want. Need is what you need for the market. Want is what you wish you could get, but you're not willing to pay for it. That's the difference. And you're right. It's through customer clinics or surveys. Exactly. And if you can use the real product or the thing that will be the real product shortly, it's even better feedback. That's where software has an advantage over everybody else because you can throw a demo together and put it on my laptop if you wanted, right?
Yeah.
And show you what's going to happen. So how do companies that you're working with, how do they measure success? Just enlighten us. Is it speed? Is it number of changes? Is it something else?
I think there's 2 parts to it. One part is if you're dealing with purely just the technology side of the house, it's I guess how quickly are we able to go from ideation to actually having something deployed? And then on the business side of the house, as a result of what we deployed, is that positively impacting the numbers that we wanted to impact? 2 things that come to mind for me when I think about kind of like the actual product development and the tech side of the house is, and this is an ongoing transition, right? Like agile development is not something that, nobody can do it by the book. Every organization is a little different. Everyone's going through their different growing pains. But if you start at one point and say, okay, we want to make these changes as far as our delivery is concerned, we get to a certain point, you can begin to incorporate things like measuring with your burn ups and your burn down charts to see what workload is the team able to how much have we done compared to what we still have left to do? Those are metrics you can pay attention to really get a feel for, how well the organization is kind of growing into the agile development. And that actually helps you plan out your workload accordingly. If you know your team can handle, and I'm just throwing out an arbitrary number, 50 story points, which story points, for those who might not know, is just a very arbitrary way of measuring workload, and that's owned by the technical team. But if you're averaging 50 story points per sprint, and the team knows that they can't just throw in an extra 30 or 40 just because the business asked for it, and you end up being able to manage the expectations on both sides of the house, right? So those are metrics that help you to really figure out what your capacity is and help you plan accordingly.
Yeah, you hit on one of the key ones that all of engineering suffers from, which is the ability to plan well. And the cool thing about Agile is the feedback. You can begin to figure out what your team's capacity is, meaning how many you can do. And then you get better, very much better very quickly at predicting, well, this is what we know how to do. So let's not schedule more than this many, right?
Exactly. It also helps the business prioritize, because if the business gets that transparency to say, okay, our team averages 50 points per sprint.
Yeah, especially when
we have a whole backlog
when that
of
team
stuff
is
that we
the constraint, right?
Exactly. We have a whole backlog of things that we want to do. But, what's the most important, knowing, and what do we want to push, knowing that they can do 50 points per sprint.
So in your experience, have you seen pitfalls with agile techniques?
Yeah, and I think
give us a couple.
It has to do with the growing pains, because, like I said, nobody's doing agile by the books. Like the textbook says, you got to do it. It's different in every organization. And I think some of the pitfalls is like falling into the trap of what agile development is not. It's very easy to fall into the trap of, okay, agile is we start this, we stop, we start this, we stop, we start, we look at this other thing, and and you end up kind of developing all over the place, which ends up kind of just being a waste of money in the long run if you think about it. I think that's one of the biggest pain points for a lot of organizations is, rather than focusing on how do we build something that works at a very basic level and then iterate on that based on the quickly gathering feedback and everything. It's a lot of companies fall into this trap of working on one thing, then they completely drop it, and then they work on another thing for a little while, then they completely drop that, and then they go and you end up having a bunch of different parts of the system that are half done.
The system engineer in me and the mechanical engineer in me was like, yeah, that's why we do it the other way. But anyways, the trouble with the other way is it's really
a fine
slow.
Line. Yeah, it's a fine line, right? Between okay, we put this and we focus on this and we gather feedback and we iterate around this accordingly, rather than start, stop, and changing priorities at completely different projects.
So let's expand on this a second. So you and I are different generations. If people could see our pictures, they would see the evidence of that. So if a lot of older guys like me scoff at agile. I don't, for the record. But what is it they don't understand? Just help them understand. There's got to be a really big business benefit to it because everybody's doing it. But if they don't understand it, if they think it's just hacking, what is it they need to understand?
Yeah. I think one of the main value points in agile delivery is speed to market for me. Obviously, there's
that usually goes to profits, right? If you
hey, I think the main argument points for agile as it compares to waterfall delivery is, and again, organizations that are doing a mix of the two. But when waterfall delivery tends to lend itself more to we document a lot up front, and we work on one thing at a time and then move to the next thing. And maybe you don't necessarily deploy all that stuff that you're working on. I could be totally wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what the value? Okay, the value in agile is like, like I said, it's that speed to market where we put something that works out at a very at a minimal level with the least amount of effort required. So from a resource standpoint, your investment is a little upfront, and then as
you hit the nail on the head. You want to get the market with the least effort, and
exactly,
and a lot of engineers, especially, we're not very good at figuring that out. So. And part of it's because we don't understand the market, partly because the market keeps changing. Right? We all had this huge challenge with COVID here recently. And I was curious, in your business, have you seen how Agile has either helped or not helped during the pandemic? And I'm just curious what your insights are.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously the pandemic is, we have to respect it as the historical event that it has been, and it's, shaken businesses to their core. I recently worked on a project where, in the timeshare industry, we essentially had to get all of our salespeople up and running from their homes. That was infrastructure that we didn't have previously. So that's something where we're able to, I guess quickly shift.
And you said it's the timeshare industry, right?
Yeah.
Which probably has nobody calling at least the first 12 months.
Exactly.
Now there's probably some good deals right now, but
yeah, actually, yeah. And I think I actually saw in the news the other day that people are going to what they call revenge travel.
Well, yeah.
A whole year after not being able to do anything.
That's why I'm on the road right now.
Exactly. But I think, yeah, definitely there have been a ton of products that have popped up as a response to the pandemic. And Agile lends itself to that in that you're able to say, here's the situation we got with the pandemic going on, and what's the minimum solution for XYZ task? Mm-hmm. What can I get out into the market with the least amount of effort required? Okay, we'll focus on that and see where it goes.
Interesting. So I'm curious if there's any relationship also of Agile practices with the size of the company, or maybe the newness of the company, its age. Have you seen that in your practices? Does size or age matter?
I think size matters. If it's a company whose specialty is not technology, and it's a large organization, typically they have more challenges than, for example, a large management consulting firm that has a sector of the business whose specialty is to go in and consult on Agile projects. I've worked both in the management consulting side of the industry, as well as we build our technology in-house at a company that it's not their specialty. They're not a technology company, but they have talent inside doing the work. So that's an interesting dynamic that I've seen. I've also seen that smaller companies are able to grasp lean agile practices quicker and easier, just because the chain of communication is much smaller. It's a smaller, tight-knit group, which, very, very literally speaking, it makes the group more agile. It's in the larger organizations, the challenge is there's people from all different backgrounds, different ages. Yeah,
and they're over specialized. That's part of the problem, right? In a smaller company, I think you've sometimes have better systems thinkers, not because they're trained, just because they have to make the small company work, right? Mm-hmm. So the large companies, we have all these different skilled people, and we have hundreds of roles, and it's important, by the way, because we get an efficiency out of it. But it's really bad when it comes to something new, because it's hard to get people to embrace the new thing. Right?
It's tough, and you also have more stakeholders involved at the larger companies, and how do you get time on their calendar, and how do we teach them and have this?
And they each have a political agenda. They do. Staying relevant in their company, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's another one that staying relevant in a new kind of way of thinking, or a new way of working, scares some people, and we should embrace them and just say, well, here's how you do your job in this other framework, right? Mm-hmm. So interesting.
It's tough. Imagine it's a conversation.
So imagine you and I met in the airport, which hasn't been happening recently, and we're going to spend 30 seconds on the elevator together, and you tell me, oh yeah, I do nearshore agile project management for software companies, and I say, well, you're a smart young man. What do you mean by that? You got 30 seconds. What do you mean by that? Here's your elevator speech.
Yeah, so essentially, I can help you, save money on your technical staff, plug and play whenever you need to, access to a large talent pool in Latin America. Got you on a language barrier, got that covered for you.
Okay,
if that's a challenge.
I like this idea of the same time zone because
time zone. Yeah,
I hate getting up in the middle of the night. So. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I think that would sum it up.
Well, no, you hit on some key points. Your elevator speech is fine. So Chris, it's been very fun talking with you, and I'm glad we came across you and talking a bit about Agile, more perspectives for our audience. So we appreciate it, and I'll hand it back to Thom.
So, Chris, I really enjoyed listening to this, but I always try to pull it back at the end when I can to sort of career advice for people who are listening. And one of the most unique things about you compared to everybody, that we've interviewed, we interview a lot of engineers on this show, is that you were a Spanish major in college.
Yep.
And so, but what comes to my mind along that is, what advice do you have for people who want to transition their career into some other area that doesn't line up with their college training? And so a lot of people think, well, I can't apply for that job within my company or in another company because it doesn't match up to my education. So what advice do you have for people who want to stretch their wings a little bit and go into an area that their actual formal education didn't match? How can they make that move, and how can they succeed?
I think the trend that I see for folks who want to get their foot in the door in an industry where they don't have like formal training is, just figure out some way that you can do some of the work and then show the value that you're able to create. I participate pretty actively, I watch on a Twitter community where there's a bunch of software engineers who get into software engineering because they, not because they went to school for it, because they took it upon themselves to learn and do these crash course coding classes, and they're vocal about their learning and and sharing it with others. Those are kind of the things that have opened up doors for them. Specifically in my case, my case is a little different because I was living overseas, and I hit one of the main requirements, like I said early on, was you got to be a native speaker of English. So that wasn't too hard for me. But once I got into, I guess it could have went south, So, once I got into the industry, being from a different background, I had no other choice but to be very curious and really become a student of my craft, which I still try to do today because I don't have that formal background that a lot of people, colleagues that I've worked with, might have had. So I've always just been asking questions and how can I do this better? And if something comes to mind, I'll Google it or I'll watch a YouTube video on the concept. I think it's the curiosity as well as figuring out what way you can do some of the work. And show that to people, even if it means you do some of it for very cheap or for free early on.
Well, that's actually really good advice. One of the things I did early in my career, I was in sales and I wanted to make a transition into marketing. So I volunteered for the local chapter of the American Marketing Association and ended up getting on the board. And all of a sudden I started getting offered, marketing jobs. Yeah,
that's stuff that you can put on your resume.
Right. Well, and it's literally, like you said, it's getting around the community, whether it's in person by joining an organization or participating in the community on Twitter or some other, virtual digital community that exists. So I think that's actually really good advice because I've seen a lot of people, make job transition and people are like, how did she get the job? And it's like, well, they just assumed she had the knowledge because she was hanging out around it.
Yep. Absolutely.
I wanted to say one other thing. You said something about you had a skill many people in that area didn't, right? The multi-language skill. And I think that's really another clue for everybody listening is do a quick skills assessment. there's a demand for something. And if you happen to be in a small group of people that have that skill, whatever that skill is, all of a sudden you'll have job opportunities that everybody else won't. And it's just because you have the skill. And that's a good career advice everywhere in your career is when those opportunities show up where nobody's volunteering and your skills are pretty close, just volunteer. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It rarely has a downside, especially when you fill a gap of a company. It rarely has a downside.
Yep.
Usually has big upsides.
Well, again, Chris,
thanks again.
Thank you so much for joining us here. And thank you to everybody who listened. Please join us every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.